Hello, my name is Brock Hertzfeld, and I will be covering some additional material. So I work with the IT staff here at CETE. We help run the WebXam online testing system. It's myself, Brock Hertzfeld, Richard Huggins, and this guy. Well, so I'm going to go over a couple of different parts of the system from the interface, as well as some of the things that we would like you to do. Michael Detweiler is our third individual here. He's running the audio. If you have any issues with the audio, let me know. We also have 3 more staff members that tend to work on the telephone and answer the telephone calls. That's Lori Dotson, Maria Moore, and Kathy Summerfield. So if you call in, that's who you'll be talking to. We also have the WebXam email line. When you email, it's usually the 3 IT staff that are here doing this presentation. So we'll be going over a couple of different pieces. An introduction, we'll talk about the testing cycle, types of WebXam assessments, and what's new in WebXam this year. CETE is a research center at The Ohio State University. We have been doing testing for a number of years. We are contracted by ODE to develop and deliver Ohio CTE tests since 1993. For a long time, we dealt with paper and pencil tests. In 2001, we converted over and created the WebXam online testing system. In 2015 and 16, we tested approximately 100,000 students in the CTE pathway tests and family and consumer science tests. We also do teaching professions, which is a portfolio scoring reporting system that collects data on students taking portfolios. This is a 25% increase year over year. So over the last few years, as the importance of testing has ramped up, we've seen large increases, 25% or plus per year. So we're seeing a lot more school districts are testing and using the WebXam system. The testing cycle. So the testing cycle starts with item writing. And how that relates to CETE is we work with the field of teachers to find subject matter experts that we recruit, and we can either recruit from teachers or industry professionals that are related to the career field that's being written. We refer to the subject matter experts as SMEs. The SMEs create the items for content areas using ODE's course outlines. So ODE will contract with another vendor. They will write material about what the courses should be about related to the content area. Once that is created, CETE will often get handed that material to design a test around. SMEs will review and validate the items. First the SMEs will write the items, so they'll come here to CETE. We get small groups of people, usually 3 or 4 at a time. We use a facilitator, which is a staff member that we have here that has experience in writing tests. They will use an application that we have built in-house, and they will start writing an item. They will use the course outlines to decide what areas they need to write items in, and then they'll write those items. Once they've written items, the SMEs are also responsible for reviewing and validating the item's accuracy and content. So one group may write an item, and then they'll discuss whether or not in that group they feel it's a good item. They'll create the answers, and then later on they'll also review in a larger group with all the different subgroups, which we usually do about 3 or 4, sometimes 5 groups of 4 teachers or so. They'll get together as a larger group, and they'll go through all the items again, and they'll pick at them and decide if they have any issues that they want to edit or change. And then we have a process using an application that we've built that we collect data about the items, how the teachers feel about how their students would do with those items. And we collect all this data for later processing to determine the cutoff score for the tests. So that's the SMEs provide judgments. We call those judgments. If you are interested in signing up, if you feel like you want to participate in helping create better tests for your students, we have an open website where you can submit your name, and we will track all the individuals in different career fields. When the career field comes around to being rewritten, we will have you in the database, and we'll contact you if we need additional writers. So at news.webexam.org/item writing, there is additional information about the career fields that will be upcoming, as well as a form that you can go to sign up. The field testing is the next process. So after a large bank of items have been written, generally our bank of items for a particular course is going to be 90 to 100 items. We are going to release a field test. So the field test is the very first time that those items go out and get seen by students. Field testing can encompass the first 1 or 2 years of a test life cycle. So when we put that test out, we have students start taking them. They will be seeing all of the items that were written. So we want to collect data from students who are actually taking the test to see how they truly perform on the test items. During field testing, a passing status is not available on test completion. So when a student completes a test, we haven't set a cutoff score. We haven't determined at what score percentage a student is going to be considered passing or not. That's why we're in field testing. We're still collecting data. So we've collected data from the teachers, the SMEs that have written the items about how they feel students should do, as well as in the field testing phase, we're collecting data about how the students actually did. In May, the first or second year of field testing, depending on the number of students that we have been able to collect data from, we will create a pre and post test from that bank of items. So since we have 80 to 100, 90 to 100 items, that'll get split into a pre and a post test. Once the items have been created 2 tests from them, we then have the knowledge of what the post-test items are, and we can go back and retroactively score the students that have already taken the test. So while in field testing, they're taking maybe 90 item tests, we're not giving them a score at that point. At the end of the year, when we have enough data, we will create a pre-test and a post-test. And since we then know what the post-test items are, we can then, and we have the cutoff score, we can then grade that, and we apply it in WebXam, and then they can see the grade. Even if a student has taken all required EOC tests, the student may not have a true overall pathway test score until June. So one thing about field tests is when a student's taking a field test, and if we don't have this cutoff score and we can't give them their grade on it, their overall pathway score, which is the combination of the number of tests that they need to take to pass the overall pathway. Since we don't have a scoring on the pathway test, if a student has even one pathway test, or I'm sorry, field test, if they have even one field test, we can't give you the overall score for the pathway. So these field tests do make it a little bit confusing about the score of a student in a pathway. So please be aware of that. Yes?
So what does ODE do? If you can't give them a final score?
We will always... So the question is, what happens when we don't have the score? Field testing is a pretty integral part of rolling out a test and being able to validate that the items are assessing the student's knowledge well. Since we do want to keep the field testing as part of the process for the validation piece, we just have to wait. We will always give your students a score at some point, but it will be delayed. So you should always expect that you will get it. The difficulty is that the time of when you're going to get it can be problematic. We will always report those scores, but students that do participate in field testing sometimes will have a delay. Oftentimes it's 1 year, so you'll get it. You'd be able to get it in the June. We'd open up the field test in the fall. You won't get a score on that particular field test. You can get scores on any tests that you're taking that are post-tests. They will get scores on those. Generally, if we have enough numbers of students that take the test in June, we'll have the data that we need to then give the score and do it. We want to try and knock out as much of the scoring for the field tests in 1 year as we can. The one issue that we have had is some career fields that don't have a lot of students. It's more difficult to get those scores calculated in only 1 year. But you should always expect that you will eventually get the final score of how the student did.
And we will see those scores before they are uploaded
Yeah, the question is, will you be able to see the scores before they're uploaded to the ITC? So the scores will be, it's a pretty close timeline. So if we rescore in June, we're also preparing the downloads for the ITCs. But the ITCs, when they get them, they should be passing those scores back to the school district before they ever make it up to the EMIS system. So the ITCs collect the data, the school district should then have the opportunity to go through the data, and then the school district should be submitting it to EMIS. So you should always get the opportunity to see the data before it's submitted to EMIS.
Just to clarify there, Brock, you said it's a pretty close timeline. There's literally 1 week where they're available on WebXam before the download files are available. So about 1 week they're ready. We normally send out an email when the field tests are rescored. At least worst case, it's available on our calendar the date that the scores will be posted.
Yeah, at that point, those scores are always going to be reported. There isn't much change that you can do. Seeing those scores, the thing that you can do, and what we do recommend doing, is if you track your students as well as you can with their scoring year to year, any tests that they perform poorly in that they've taken earlier in their high school career, they have the opportunity to retake once per year, which is really good advice. If you have the opportunity to spend time really looking at the reports, find students that didn't pass, and create a plan for them to be able to retake the test the following year. You get one shot per year to improve those student scores. So the testing cycle, the operational test, this is after we've taken the field tests and we've split them into a pre and a post test. So these are the tests that we're scoring, and the post test data does make it up to the EMIS system. So the operational test is the standard type of test that is normally given in WebXam. The other major exception is the field testing that we just discussed. Scores are included in the end of year report to EMIS. So again, we report to the ITCs. The ITCs collect the data. They then should make those files available to the school districts. The school districts have an opportunity to review them, and then they get submitted to the EMIS system.
We do have a question from online. Once the score is given for the field test, is that score also used for the final test, or in terms of calculating the pathway score?
So we don't give a score on the field test. The field test, you'll get a percentage. The one report that you will get after a student takes a field test is they'll see the percentage that they got correct. So you can kind of know how they did. But in order to pass a test, you have to beat the cutoff score. So our tests are not A, B, C, D. They are you passed or you didn't pass. And that's set by the cutoff score. In field testing, we don't have the cutoff score because we don't have all the data that we need to calculate it yet. So your students will know the percent that they got correct. They won't know if they've actually passed the test until the end of the year when we set the cutoff score. And the field test has been divided from one large test, 90 items or so, into two 40-item tests. And then we have the items that are the post-test, the 40 items that are the post-test, and we will grade those with the cutoff score, and that will tell the student or the teacher whether or not they pass. At that point, the data becomes available in WebXam in the reporting window. Are there any questions on that? Because it is a lot of information to handle. Okay.
So one thing more, in the pre-test, like you said, in the field testing, you just get the correct answers.
You get the percent of correct items. So the question is in the field, well, part of the question is, what do you get to see in the field test? And that is the percentage that the student got correct.
All the students got correct, or one student got correct?
You can see, the question is all students or just one. Using the reports, you can see both. The student will see a report right when they finish, which is the percent correct. And then the teacher can go back and use reports to pull up individual information or aggregate information, but you'll only get limited details on the field test, and that is the percentage that they got overall of the items correct.
Okay, and are these tests reported to the ODE?
Field test is not reported because we don't have, if it's in a field testing state, it's not reported. Once we have calculated the cutoff score and it becomes a post-test, we retroactively grade the students and then we report. So when it's in field testing, the data's all there, but we can't calculate whether or not the student passed or not because we haven't determined the cutoff score. Okay? Go ahead.
Okay, so field tests.
Yes.
This is a great topic. This is good stuff. Marketing research. Okay, 36 MD. Marketing was new, and so if you run the results for your junior class that took those tests at the end of the field test, those things all you couldn't see much of anything. You rerun them in the fall as you're looking over your information's on there, and if you look at the report that you would use for a non-field test, you can tell who's met the pathway and all that kind of stuff. If you run the report right now, at least in my few kids that we have, it looks like they're all making the pathway score, the way it's highlighted or what have you. However, it does not show in the marketing research like the cutoff scores and that information. So the question for my teacher is which test do I need to worry about for my kids to make sure they meet that cutoff? And maybe this is a specific question for outside the scope, but that's kind of one of the confusing things about how that is reporting right now on a field-tested pathway.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, I think so, and I'll try and cover. Hopefully, I'll answer it, and if not, we can one-on-one, either through email or after the session, we can look at it. So the question is, a teacher was looking at his students, and he was seeing that the student was passing the pathway, but he was also interested in how would you tell which individual tests weren't the student was deficient in, and which ones you could try and have them retested the next year. You want more detail on what the individual tests are?
On a test that's not pathway or not field tested, if you run the report, you can see that they met the cycle, they met the pathway for that subject area. With marketing, it's showing me like right now, everybody's green in marketing. So it looks to me I got 100% passage in the pathway. I don't have to worry about it, but it doesn't look the same as like my welding or my auto kits or what have you. So we want to make sure that we're testing and retesting the right kids to make that pathway score for the senior year.
Okay.
And maybe it's the wrong time for that particular question, so I'm going down too deep.
Yeah, we can sit down after the session and look at it. Sorry, I'm trying to keep the microphone close. I think the ultimate question comes down, some of the courses in 36MD, I'm blanking out on the name right now. So some of them were rescored last school year, but not necessarily all of them.
Okay.
So most likely that's what it is that their students are going to be showing on most of the, or have a pass-fail on most of the courses. But if there's one course they took that we don't have a pass-fail on yet because it's still in field testing for year 2, we're not going to have the pathway score. So like I said, after the session, we can sit down and go over the reports together if you like, so we could make sure that's what the case is. So most likely that's what's going on.
I can't wait.
Okay. And then we do have one question from online real quick. So if a student gets 80% correct, but the cutoff score is 85% correct, they did not pass the course. Is that correct?
That is correct. They have to beat the cutoff score. So one thing to really know about is that you may, and this is from me who wasn't a teacher, and when I started looking at how this operates, it seems kind of silly. You could even have a test where a kid scores 90, and you would just assume they're going to pass. But if the cutoff score, if the teachers and the student data that we collect during the field testing bears out that kids should actually be scoring in the mid to high 90s, it very well could be the case that you could have a test that you have to beat 90% to beat the cutoff score. And this is all calculated using statistics on how the students performed, as well as judgments that the teachers provided us when they wrote the items of how they felt an average student would perform on the test. So it's not something where you can go with a normal scale, 60, 70, 80%, 90%, where you can think about grades. It's about the difficulty of the test as judged by the performance of the students and the judgments of the teachers to calculate what that cutoff score is. So you would want to pay attention to what that is. Don't just assume that if it's a high score that they are automatically going to pass. And we have that data up. There's a pretty important page called the About the Assessments, where we put all the data that we have, kind of the metadata about the tests, where you can go in one place and look up what the cutoff scores are, whether it's in has a pre-test, whether it's in post-testing or still field testing. We have one place that we've tried to make this all available, and it is accessible through in WebXam with a couple of clicks, and we'll try and go over that later. So to carry on here, so I was talking about the operational tests. These are the tests that we are going to give the student score at the end of the test. Passing status is available immediately on test completion. So this isn't like a field testing where they only get the percent that they got correct. This we will tell them if they beat the cutoff score. So the way that the test score is calculated is for EOC pathway tests, scores are calculated based on the following formula, where S1 through SN are the student's EOC test scores, and N is the number of the difference of EOC tests taken in the student pathway. So essentially, we take the scores and we average them. We're just trying to find out the overall average. So if you're curious about how we're going to be doing the overall pathway test scores, that's how we do it. And then again, for the EOC pathway test cutoff scores are calculated based on the following formula. It's the same thing. We're just taking the average. So for the pathways, we're going to take the average of how the students scored, what their scores were. We're going to average them all out. And we're going to take the cutoff scores for all the tests, and we're going to average those out. And we're going to determine if the averages of what they scored beats the cutoff score average of all their tests. And if so, they have passed the pathway. So this is where, again, testing them, if they haven't passed in their lower years of schooling, if you retest them, you can raise the bar higher and higher, because that average is really what gets looked at. If a student scores well in 3 tests but really, really bombs in 1, it's going to bring down their overall average, so they might not pass the pathway. If they had one more opportunity to take that low-performing test and they do much better on it, it's really going to boost their average up and help them pass the pathway. We have had 2 types of tests in WebXam. So the older style is the modular test. This test was broken up into modules, so each module was an individual test the student would take. Students had to take every single test in order to pass the pathway. They had to take every test and they had to perform well on it. All students that still have a modular-based test available to them is students that are in education. And I believe that we are writing that this year. So this will be one of the remaining or last modules that will be replaced. And once that happens, we will be switching over to our new style of test. Currently, seniors only, so only the seniors would be taking this, is in hospitality and tourism. So after this year, that test will go away. And next year, education will only be for seniors. And then the year after that, we will have no more module-based tests. So the new style of test we call the end-of-course test. And this was a decision by ODE to really change the way that they were doing the testing. So the modular-based tests were tests that were based off of specific knowledge areas in a career field, where the end-of-course test is designed to map exactly with the course outline. So ODE creates a course outline, and it says, this is the material that should be covered in a particular course. So a teacher can review the course outline. They can know what the test is going to be based off of. And then at the completion of that course, the student should be offered the end-of-course test. And this will test the knowledge that they've gained during that course. Students are not expected to take all EOC tests for their pathway. A pathway might have a number of EOC tests. The thing that you want to do is if a student took a course, they should take the test that corresponds with that course. So you don't have to take all the tests, you just have to take the courses that the student took. All students, agricultural, constructions, arts and communications, business and finance, engineering, health, human services, IT, law and public safety, manufacturing, marketing and transportation. Those are all EOC courses. Juniors only is hospitality and tourism. So as you notice here, or it might be kind of difficult to notice, but we're phasing out. So seniors only are taking the old hospitality and tourism course that's modular based, and a new test has come out, and the juniors are taking that, and that's the new test for hospitality and tourism. So as we phase out a test, we leave it in the system so that the students who started maybe taking that test their junior year have an additional attempt at it their senior year with that same test material. So whenever a new test comes out, we'll have a test that might have a different number, the same career field area, but there's a new test and an old test. The old test will always remain up for an additional year so that seniors can take it. That sometimes can cause confusion. There is a document on ODE's site that maps out exactly what tests your students should take based off of the school year. It's called the CTE Assessment Matrix. If we don't have a link to it later in this presentation, we'll probably pull it up at the end. So some of the types of assessment that we have the teaching professions portfolio. It's rubric scored. Students complete a portfolio with scores entered into the web exam by 2 assessors. The students that are in the portfolio system, their teachers usually know how to do this. It is not a very large number of the tests that we give, but it is something that web exam supports. FCS, new tests are available for the 2016-17 school year. However, the old ones will remain through this school year, so we still have the old tests available for seniors. Employability, this is a special test. It is not required by the Ohio Department of Education. 2 test types are available, 100-item pretest and an 80-item post-test. That is a test that we offer separately. Web Exam does charge for this test. It's something that some school districts like to give to their students so that they have something that students can show as they go out and try and apply for jobs, that they've met some minimum requirements of being a good employee. Web Exam Administration. So we're going to go over a number of different subject areas here. The very first one is the About the Assessments. So this is just a small section of the website that I listed earlier. This is what I like to think of as the metadata about the test. So every test that is in Web Exam is available at that URL there. It's kind of a one-stop shop if you want to find out the details of the test. And this includes what type of test it is. Is it field tests or is it in post-testing? Does it have a cutoff score set already? Or if it's in field testing, it won't have a cutoff score set? How many items are in that particular test? And do we have an advanced performance standard? So in some tests, we've set an advanced standard where if a student scores above that, they know that they've met the criteria for an advanced student in that field.
So is it true you have to take at least 4 end-of-course tests, but you have to pass 3 if they want to meet the requirements?
It is, it's kind of a convoluted way to explain this, so there's usually a lot of confusion about it. On this page, if you see here, there is a link, it says rules for this test. If you look up the pathway that you're giving, and if you click on that number there, it'll jump to the bottom of the page where we've written out what the rules are. It changes for different pathways. So some pathways could have only 3 courses where a student could take 3 courses. It's the minimum point where once they've taken 3 tests, we will score that and we'll start marking whether or not they've passed the pathway. They will get marked as passing if they've passed the first 3. But if they're in a course where they've taken 4, they are required to take 4. If they take 5 courses, they're required to take 5 tests. And they can go from a state where they've taken 3 tests, they've passed, they go to the 4th one and they perform so poorly that they could go from passing the pathway to not passing. ODE's rule is don't stop testing your kids as soon as they pass the pathway. That's not the way that the system's designed to operate. It is to test them on every single course they take. The majority of the students that we have are generally, if they go all the way through a CTE program, are going to have about 4 tests that they take. It would be more rare that you'd be in a pathway that only 3 are available. But if you want to double check exactly how your students are affected, the About the Assessment page is the place you want to go. And go ahead and click on where it says rules for that test. Every single different criteria that we have for different pathways is listed there. And if you still have any confusion about it, feel free to call us or shoot an email, and we will go over it with you. So these are just a list of the tests that are retired. And these are the list of the tests that are new. So we rolled out a lot of tests this year that are brand new. This is the other document that I had alluded to earlier about on ODE's site. And this is what we recommend for people who aren't quite sure what tests they should be giving their students. This is hosted on ODE's site. We just refer to it as the assessment matrix. It will map in two different columns. Now this one doesn't show it very well, but this column over onto the right, the test names, if there's a brand new test, it'll actually be split into two columns. So right now, all these ones that are here that just have the far right column have the name of the test that's there. That's what the kids in that career field should be taking. If that column was split in two, that would mean that there was a new test that came out, and it would indicate one test that the juniors and below should take and another test that the seniors should take. And again, that's for when a new test comes out, we leave the old test up for one additional year so that seniors have one more opportunity to take it before they graduate. So it's kind of a rolling transition from an old test to a new test. This is almost what I recommend, one of the first stops that you do if you want to find out more about what you should be giving your kids. In years where we've rolled out lots of new tests, sometimes there's some confusion where teachers haven't referred to this document and they've given their students the wrong tests. And you don't really want to do that, because what can happen is if you give your juniors a test that's only meant for seniors and you try and test them again the next year, it's going to disappear on you. And there's nothing we can do to resolve that. So when new test comes out, please be aware of it and make sure that your juniors and below start testing with it. The roles and responsibilities of a web exam administrator. Web exam administrators are responsible for managing their user hierarchy, including creating other web exam administrators and teachers' accounts. They may also enter in students either via an upload or manually, and we recommend teachers do not enter their students manually unless instructed to do so by their web exam administrators in order to curb the number of students with duplicate accounts. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this. Web exam administrators, in previous years, we had a lot more administrators. We're now trying to move to a model where we encourage less teachers to have administrator accounts and let the teachers just manage their students activating tests and assigning tests and things like that. The administrator role is important in managing the overall system of what teachers are in the system, and populating students into the system. So the two main ways that we have of doing that is you could always go in and add a student in manually through the UI in the web application. What we recommend that a lot of school districts do is to use a spreadsheet template that we have to populate the data and then send us a large template of all the students that you have, and we import that in one shot. So it saves a lot of manual labor. And because we're recommending that administrators handle these uploads with a large list of students, we recommend that a school district try and have a strategy where they have as few administrators as possible so that there's more control over knowledge about who's been uploaded and who hasn't. In a larger school district where there might be many administrators, sometimes you can have two different groups uploading student information, and they might not all have the accurate information. So if you have the opportunity and you know that you have a lot of administrators, sometimes it's recommended from our point of view that you try and have one person designated to spend the time to really manage the system and track the students as they go through. A common problem, students have more than one account. Teachers create new accounts for a student because they do not have access to see the student's existing account. So if students aren't entered in the system appropriately, a teacher may not be able to see a student, and they might try and enter in a new student account. What we're really trying to prevent is where we have duplicate student accounts. So again, administrators, if you have one administrator at your school district who can do most of this work and send up one upload file, it causes a lot less duplicate students to be created. New for the 2016-17 school year, SSIDs for students are now required. Going forward, this allows us to accurately identify a student to prevent them from having duplicate accounts. So for administrators, this is a pretty big change. In all previous years, we used something called the EMIS ID. The EMIS ID was something, was an identifier that a school district was supposed to create that was supposed to be unique for each student. It caused a number of problems because as students maybe move school districts, that EMIS ID wouldn't travel with them. And since it was created by the school district, if they went to a new school district, they might just get a new identifier, and they may have tests that are on one account and then go somewhere else and test again on another account. So we've petitioned ODE to have approval to use SSIDs. SSIDs are a unique identifier that is created by the state and is handled across the state uniquely for every student. So now that WebXam has started accepting SSIDs, we can actually test that when a student moves to a different district, we can identify with their old account and move their account a lot easier. We also have the ability when students are uploaded to find, to match the students more precisely. Sometimes with the EMIS ID, the EMIS IDs weren't cracked very accurately, and sometimes we would receive different EMIS IDs from year to year for students. With the SSID, if the administrator truly does track and have the accurate SSIDs, it should be very easy for us to find duplicates and warn the school district that there's a problem that they can correct before the account actually gets created. So this is going to be pretty exciting, and hopefully it'll alleviate a lot of headaches that administrators have had in the past where their students aren't being reported correctly because of mistakes in the creation of their accounts. Test retake policy. I've covered this a little bit before. Each EOC test can be taken once per school year. If it's retaken for the following school year, we take the highest score, so there isn't really a penalty if the student doesn't do better. We normally would expect that they would improve, but we will keep their highest score. They should take the test for every course they have taken, and that's really important. You should not be not testing a student because you feel like they won't do well or that they could lower their already passing pathway test score. So again, if they've taken 3 tests, they could pass the pathway, and we would report it in the system. But if they've taken another 4th test or another 4th course, they need to take the test for that. You need to keep on testing your students for every additional course they take. For the modular sequence, each test can be taken once per school year. If a test is retaken the following school year, we will again keep the higher score, and any module not taken will be counted as a 0 score. So the modular tests aren't as prevalent now because we only have 2 pathways that even have a modular-based test. But just so you know that if you don't take all of the tests that are in a modular sequence, they will be marked 0 for any test they didn't take. So this is a screenshot of the student information page, or this information for a particular student. So if you were creating a student manually through the UI of the web application, this is what you would see. You'd be asked to enter in the school building and the teacher, as well as the other additional fields. The one thing that has changed here is where it indicates the EMIS ID on that data, that has been changed to say SSID on the new application. You can set up the reported pathway test. It has a little asterisk next to it. The reported pathway test is very, very important. It is what determines what your student or how the student's grade is calculated. So we've had some people recently where we've discovered they haven't entered in the reported pathway tests and they can't determine why their students aren't showing up in reports. The reported pathway is what the application looks at before it starts calculating what their score is. So if we have the reported pathway tests for 38 MD, we will then look for the tests that they've taken in that pathway, and then we'll calculate their score. If there is nothing set, we will not even grade the student. So each student needs to have that, and then Down below that, the end of course tests field is where you can add each individual test that you want to assign to a student's account. This is for the test creation page. You can also go back in and edit this on the student accounts in a different menu, but this is for when you're first entering them into the system. There is an accommodations field. If you know that your student has an accommodation when you're creating the account, you can set that there, as well as gender, race, ethnicity, and grade level. Grade level does not get used in any way for WebXam. We don't pay attention to it other than some school districts, if you decide to track the grade level, you can do reports sorting by just the grade level. Most school districts don't enter in the grade level accurately, so it only benefits those who do track it on purpose so that they can do the reports that way. So that's kind of a gotcha. We don't change it. The school district would be responsible for changing the grade levels for it to be accurate. This question?
Okay, so this might answer my question. So, like, we have students that are in satellite programs that are in multiple pathways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the student I was talking about, like they had taken, maybe their last test that they had taken was Family and Consumer Science. So do we have to go back and change the pathway on a student like they took ag and Family and Consumer Science? So when I looked at the one student, they had a blank on their student, for their pathway test.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have to go back and change that pathway so that score comes over?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad you brought it up because it lets me go in to talk about it. So reported pathway tests, if a student is going to become a CTE concentrator, and that would require that we do report. So we want to have the reported pathway test set and all of their tests set in the end of course tests field there. So that's what allows the student to take those particular tests. We will report on whatever is set there. FCS does not have a pathway. So FCS should be set underneath the additional test field. So if we allow students to take any tests in the system that they would like, but the main primary goal of WebXam is to report CTE pathway data back to the state. So that's what we're really interested in, but we do allow you to take additional tests. If you know that you're going to give a test that's outside of their pathway, you should set it in the additional tests field. So in that case, FCS should be set in the additional test field, but if they're a CTE concentrator, their pathway should be set in the reported pathway field, and all their CTE tests will be set in the end of course tests area.
So if they take Family and Consumer Science, media arts, and ag production and manufacturing, okay, so they've taken all of those tests. How do we, and then we don't know what their concentrator is going to be until we don't know which program they're going to be a concentrator in until maybe after you guys decide to. I mean, we may not know when that test is given or when that file is extracted. I mean, I guess the question is, do we have to go back into WebXam and change that reported pathway before you do your poll to send the scores to the ITC? Yeah,
so as soon as a student has been determined to be a CTE concentrator, as soon as you determine that they are going to go for that program and try and complete that program, you want to have it set. While students can take multiple different career areas to find out what they want to do, the goal is if they're in a CTE program, they're supposed to pass a pathway. They're supposed to study in a concentrated area. Now, they may, in their early years in high school, be taking a couple of different ones because they're undecided. But as soon as they're decided, it's really important that you do set their reported pathway. So essentially, one of the big goals of WebXam is to be able to report data back to the state which can then be reported to the federal government. So the CTE programs get funding through the federal government, and a stipulation that's on that is data must be provided that you're testing your students and they are learning something. So if a student's just taking multiple different tests, they may be taking CTE programs, which are funded by the government, but the program is actually to have them pick a pathway and study in that and be reported on passing the knowledge in that content area. So, yes.
Just talking to her, what about deferred students? We have some deferred students that will do one program for 2 years and then they'll continue and do another program. How would you address that?
You could, if they're doing 2 years straight, you could set the reported pathway for whatever they're concentrating in then. We will report the data that they, if they're 2 years, that's a pretty good opportunity to complete 4 courses. If they take the 4 courses, you can have the reported pathway set. We will report every end of the year how they've done in that pathway. And if they switch, you could change the reported pathway to another area, and they could do those 2 years, and then we would report on that. What would be more difficult is if they're doing a split where they're doing 2 concentrations at a time. At that point, I would recommend that you choose whatever one they feel is their primary concentration is, because you want to make sure they've taken enough courses and that they've taken enough of the end of course tests to pass the pathway. Once they get one pathway passed, that's what ODE is interested in having be reported to the federal government that they've met one. Anything above and beyond that would be great, but it's not, it's more than the minimum requirement. There's a question from online.
Yeah, so we actually have 2 questions from online, but I'm sort of going to answer them after I ask the question. So if a student takes more than one CTE program, do we just pick one pathway to report? The answer is yes. ODE has asked that we only report each student once, regardless of how many pathways that they are enrolled in. That is, as of today, that might change. We've heard a little bit that ODE may be asking us to report on the course level. But as of right now, ODE only wants one pathway score. So yes, you would just pick one to report. The second question is, just got to find it. We have students that are in both 03 MC Agribusiness and Production Systems and 45 MC Structural Construction. Which pathway should be the reported pathway? For that question, I would say that we would hand off to ODE. I would check with a program specialist. For Ag, that would be Cassandra Palsgrove, but those could be found on ODE's site. Yeah, but for specific pathway questions like that in terms of reporting, we would defer to ODE for that.
Yeah, if you have very specific questions about policy, about what people should take, ODE is going to be your resource. We can relay policy that has been set by ODE, and we can point you to their policy. But if you have detailed questions about exact specifics about policy, you're always going to want to go to ODE to answer those questions. From my standpoint, if a student's doing multiple different pathways, I would think asking the student which one they would prefer. Because you definitely want to have the one set that they are going to spend the most energy and time taking courses in. But if you have any questions above and beyond that, ODE would be who you should speak to.
Yeah, hey, Brock.
I have a question for you. Going back to the EMIS ID going to the SSID, I noticed by looking on my accounts here, you've already changed that field on your guys' side, and you automatically calling now my EMIS ID and SSID for my current senior class because those were updated in the past. Do we have to go back and change that to an SSID, or are you just rolling with the what currently have? Obviously, new kids will get the new uploads will have the SSID. Do I need to go back to my current seniors?
The recommended way to do it would be to, and again, this is why I was saying it's good to try and have one administrator identified as being the upload specialist. Often it's the EMIS coordinator for the school district. Okay, so on the in WebXam underneath secondary students menu, there is an upload link. On that page is an Excel file that if you download, it's our template for the data that we want to collect. And in that field, we ask for two things right now. Well, we ask for a number of things, but two important things. We ask for the EMIS ID that the school district was traditionally using for their students, as well as we ask for the SSID. What that allows us to do is, using the upload, we can then identify if a student's in your school district with an EMIS ID. And if we find an account that's already there, we will then swap out the EMIS ID on file with the SSID for you. If you go through that process, it's an automated process of just filling out the data in the Excel file and sending it to us. Anything that comes in with the Excel file, if we can use it to match the student, we will take the current data in the Excel file and we will update the student's account with that information. So we're hoping, as school districts are sending in their upload files for this year, we will convert the largest majority of students as we can to the SSIDs. And we are watching those files. If we see something that doesn't look like the SSID, we are going back to the school district and saying that it looks like there's a problem. Can we work on this file and try and get accurate? This may take 1 or 2 years to try and get the majority of the students converted over. But at some point, we will probably then start looking at the students' account and blocking them from testing if they don't match the criteria of what an SSID is. So at some point, we will want to have a cutoff where we require all SSIDs. And it just gives such advantages that this is a really exciting time to kind of have that transition happen because of the accuracy, the added accuracy that we're going to be getting from having SSIDs. Uploads will be more effective and accurate. We can track students as they move around the state. The reporting will be more accurate. So we're trying to make it as painless as possible. So this is just more screenshots on adding in students. We already discussed most of that on a previous slide. Here's some common test activation problems. You want to check that your student does have an account. If you find or you can't find that your student has an account, I would recommend, if you know an administrator, a WebXam administrator in your school, talking to them to see if they can find it. In WebXam, all accounts are assigned into a hierarchy, and what that means is that we use a system where accounts are above one another, and it goes from a top-level admin, then to teacher accounts, and then to student accounts. But an account can only see individuals that are below them in that hierarchy. So there can be situations where a hierarchy is not set up correctly, where somebody logs in, they might not see a student, and then they want to create the student, but it might be not that the student's not in the system, it's just that they can't see them. So, as I said earlier, as we're trying to get less people have administrator accounts and just have one person that's more in control of handling student account creation, hopefully we'll have less of these issues. Teachers will be assigned in the upload files the students that are underneath them, and then they should see them with less problems. So if you don't see a student, I would recommend trying to talk to your local administrator to see if they can see the student before you create an additional account. Going forward, as we get the SSIDs, if you even go in and try and add a student account, if you use the appropriate SSID, we will be able to stop you from creating that account. We will tell you that there is a student with that ID. You also want to make sure before you're testing that the student account is enabled. So there's a state for a student account. It's enabled and disabled. An enabled student is able to log into the WebXam system. A disabled student, when they try and log in, they will just get a message that says that their account's disabled. So you can, as students graduate or move out, you could disable their accounts just to lock them from even being able to go into WebXam. You want to make sure that the student account has the correct test assigned to the account. If you go and try and assign a student to a test and they're not showing up, what I would recommend is searching for the student account, going to their account information page, and making sure that that test is actually set on the student's account. They will not show up. If a teacher goes in and says, I'm going to give this particular test today, they pull it up to go activate that test. It'll show a list of all the students that have that test assigned to their account. If you've never assigned tests to students' accounts, they will never show up in any test activation menu. The student account is under a teacher or administrator doing the activation. So again, if your hierarchy of accounts is not set up correctly, a teacher who is not assigned or that particular student will not be able to see that student. So you might need to get an administrator involved, or in worst case scenario, you could contact us and we could help you figure out what the issue is. Student has not already taken the test this year. If you go to activate a test for a student and they're not there, but the test is assigned to their account, it is very likely that they already took the test for that year. The test will not be available for them to test again. You can see the test that the student has taken by going to the student account. So anywhere in WebXam where you search for a student and you see their name, if you click on their name, it'll go to their individual information, and on that page it'll show you the test that they've taken and the date that they took it on. WebXam reports. We have individual reports. You can see how a student performed on either a pathway test or an individual course. There is also a checkbox there that you can click that says expanded reports. When you do that, it displays a student's pathway test as well as their performance on each individual course. So there is kind of different ways to look at the tests. There is the individual tests, the end of course tests, where they scored, they passed or they didn't pass. And then they take a couple of different end of course tests, and then we start scoring the pathway, which is the overall, the combined of those tests to see if they pass the pathway. If you use the expanded reports checkbox, you'll get all of them in one view if you are interested in seeing that. The aggregate reports lets you see how a group of students performed collectively on a pathway or on an individual test. So it's not going to be drilling down to a specific student, but you're going to see how maybe your classroom did overall on those particular tests. This is a view of an individual report. Just a little screenshot of how it looks in the system. And this is the view of the expanded report. As you notice, the second column there is the overall pathway, and then below that is the individual performance on those tests. This is a sample of the aggregate report. So instead of seeing lots of little tests, what you're seeing is the combined scores of a number of students into one aggregate. Administering the exam. So for those teachers that are out there giving these tests, tests are timed by default. The number of minutes equals the number of items. In general, we see that students answer the questions in about 20 seconds per individual item. So most students do not have any problems completing our tests in the allotted time for a normal classroom period. Even our field tests, which can go up to 90, 100, generally they're around 90. We find that students are able to do that in most cases in a single classroom period. The proctor is required. The person must be a paid employee of the school district. We want to make sure that if there is any cheating that happens, that there would be repercussions from the school district to that person. And if they're not a paid employee, there isn't much. It's a lot harder to punish them. Must not be a student, must not be a student teacher, or an unpaid volunteer. They do not need to be registered in WebXam. So when a test gets activated, you want to activate the test underneath the teacher that taught that, that course. And this is really important if you are doing pre-testing. So our pre-testing, when you take the field test, which is the large bank of items that gets split into then the post-test and the pre-test. If you take the pre-test, whoever assigns the test will get tracked. So this particular teacher is going to be teaching this course. They took the pre-test. Then if they give the post-test, we will calculate the student gain of how the students improve their scores based off of the teacher that gave those. So it's important if you're doing pre-tests to make sure that the teacher that assigned the course or that taught the course is the one that actually activates the test. Proctors can be anybody though. So a teacher should be involved in the activation of the tests, but a proctor just needs to be a paid employee of the school district. There has been a change. At one point, we had a rule that teachers could not be in the room. We had some feedback from school districts who said it was too difficult to have proctors, that they didn't have enough staff to do it. So a change was made. Teachers may be present in the room to assist with technology and manage student interactions, but should not observe computer screens or take tests. We don't want teachers to be observing the tests and being able to teach to the test. We're more than happy to have them be in the room and assist, but we still want to keep the tests out of their site. Students cannot use external reference materials, resources, or devices with the following exceptions. A calculator without memory. Basically, we want just a standard calculator. We don't want anything that has advanced scientific functions or can memorize information where a student could just enter in fields and get the answer. So basically, the calculators that are approved for the OGT tests are allowed, or just very, very simple, often referred to as 4-function calculators, can be used. Scrap paper can be used, but it must be collected. We don't want any of the information that a student would use on a scrap paper to be gotten out to other students that would allow them to cheat. Any tool or device specified in a student's IEP or 504 plan. So if a student has an IEP and they have specific accommodations that they can have certain things, that should be allowed. But I do encourage you that if it seems like it would be outside the bounds of what should be allowed in a computer test, to either let us know or have a conversation with ODE about what can be allowed. So we had questions about, could a student use an online encyclopedia? Could a student have an encyclopedia in the room? And some of those things you should have discussions with ODE of whether or not it should really be allowed or is it needed for that particular student. If you have questions, just let us know. Go ahead.
I just have a small question about the calculators. All of our calculators that we use for, like, let's say OGT, they have memories, but we erase them. Would those be okay to use, or will we have to buy new calculators for these tests?
The idea is that the memory is not set before a student goes in. If it's just a memory where it's going to memorize a number, like the very standard, I've got this number, I want to memorize it and then use it later, that's not a problem, especially if you're wiping it out. What we don't want is an advanced system where they could actually write in data and then recall it later. So just very simple calculators without advanced functions and can't store information that would help them cheat. So there is a testing security rule book. It's available on the WebXam website. We also link to that at the beginning of the school year. When a person logs in for the first time that year, we ask them to agree to a user agreement, and we have links to the security rule book that goes over to the security policies in more detail. It's not permissible to disseminate content or share with students. So we need your help to keep these tests secure and make sure that we're accurately evaluating the student's knowledge. So for the communications for WebXam, we have tried to solidify a little bit better how we communicate to the field and make information available to you. We've tried to move our newsletter format to be only once a month. We have seen some complaints people are getting too many communications. So when we send out our emails, we're trying to do it once a month, and we're trying to cover the most important topics for that month, as well as adding in informational and educational things that we can do. Since it is an email newsletter, it's not always available to people. So we often will go and put the same content up on the WebXam News website, and we'll have all the same links there available so that we have a permanent reference that we can send people to. When a question comes up, if we've covered something in a newsletter, we can link to that information on our website. So the news.webexam.org website is very important. If we're trying to communicate any new changes, you'll see it reflected on that website, as well as we have links to other important things. Like if you see across the navigation there is the link to the item writing information where you could sign up to participate in item writing. We have
couple of slides ago, but the question just came in. So can the teacher be alone when the test is being given, or does the proctor also need to be present?
I'm a little bit fuzzy on this.
Yeah, the teacher can be alone. There doesn't have to be anybody else in the room. The teacher can be the proctor themselves.
Yeah, the biggest issue that we had was we did, at one point, a decision was made that teachers weren't allowed to. And we went for 1 year. I think this was about 2 or 3 years ago. We went for 1 year, and a lot of school districts communicated to ODE that the burden was too great on having staffing. So there were changes made, and we update our security rule book once a year to make those changes relevant. There is a proctoring section that goes over best practices as well as the details on who exactly is allowed to proctor. So there was some confusion for a little while where for an entire year we were saying that teachers could not, and then the next year the policy was changed, so we had to reverse what we were saying, which caused a little bit of confusion. But I think it's changed for the better, and school districts are a lot happier now. So again, on this page, on the news page, this is a screenshot. It's a little bit older than what's currently up there, but important links there across the top. Item writing, if you want to come participate and help write tests, that's where you would go. There is now a section about the types of tests, where it says pre-test. It's now just generally about the different types of tests. There is a link for the teacher test reviews. So we offer teacher test reviews. Teachers are allowed to come see the tests in a proctored environment. Generally, it's in this room that we're in right now. If you come to CETE, we do that about once a month. If you go to that page that's linked there, we have all the details about how you can sign up. We do charge a fee for that because it's outside the scope of delivering the tests. There's a fee for it. Teachers can register and come here to see the tests. You're allowed to see any test that you haven't seen previously. We only want teachers to be able to see a test once in its life cycle. We don't want teachers to be overexposed to what's on those tests. We also, in some cases where school districts have a lot of teachers and they don't want to have the expense of sending people to Columbus, we have set up agreements where we can come out to your school district if you have enough people, or we recommend that school districts in a certain region, if they can partner up and maybe have one place that we send a couple of staff members out to host a session there. It saves a lot of travel time for the school districts. Again, there is a fee for that. If you contact us, we'll have our people make a quote. A lot of school districts are very excited to do that, though, so we've done a lot of it in the last few years. There's also the link to the users workshop. That's where we had the information about how to come to this session, and after this session is over, we will post presentation documents as well as video for this current session so that people who weren't able to attend today can see it in the future. Web exam support can be reached at webexam@osu.edu. If the issue is urgent, web exam can be reached at the phone number. So our recommendation is, if you have an issue but it is not time sensitive, to send in an email. We recommend that in the email you include as much detail as you can. We sometimes get emails of people asking questions, but they're so vague that we have to go back and ask again for specifics. So if you are sending in an email to WebExam, please be as specific as you can. We do not want EMIS IDs or SSIDs to be transmitted through email. We also do not want the upload files that people have to be transmitted through email. That is not a secure form of communication. If you are doing an upload, there is an upload form in the website. When it's transferred that way, it is securely transmitted from you to us. Email is not secure. So if you are submitting a ticket, please don't send anything that you should not be sending through email. But email can be handled by our IT staff as soon as we can get to it. Generally, it's pretty quickly. We have a 5 business day turnaround time. Generally, it's a lot faster than that, depending on the complexity of the issue. If you're in an emergency situation where you need help and an email is just not going to be fast enough, please feel free to call us. But if it's just a policy question and you're happy to find out in the next 24, 48 hours, email is our recommended communication channel. This screenshot is just kind of a little overview about what the students see when they log in. If you come to a teacher test review, you'll get to see the whole testing side in action, but this is generally what a student kind of sees. This is one of our sample demo tests that's in the system. So on the left-hand side, there is a number. Call it our quick jump list. They can click on any number to go to a particular item. Down at the bottom, the next and the back, that will rotate through that list. The numbers will be marked gray if they've answered the question. They'll be outlined in dark if they've seen the question but not answered it. And then the ones that are in the lighter gray are ones that they haven't even looked at yet. Down at the bottom, there is a submit test. We oftentimes have students that don't pay attention at all, and they hit the submit test button immediately, thinking that it's submit the question. It actually submits the entire test. What we've placed after the submit test is a pop-up window that will then say, are you sure you want to submit this test? So we're trying to stop the student from doing what they shouldn't be doing. We do get reports that students blow past that too. Our hands are pretty tight on what we can do if a student submits a test when they're not supposed to. We've tried to warn them that they shouldn't be doing that. If you do have a situation like that, you can send in to the WebXam email and you can ask us to review the test. But we have to document all requests for any changes to a test to reactivate it so they can go back in and finish it. Any of that we document completely so that we have a good record of exactly what's being asked. So if you are giving tests, really try and talk to your students to make sure that they pay attention when they're taking the test and not accidentally just submit. In the top right-hand corner, there is a little thing that says close. If there is ever an emergency or a student gets ill or there is some type of problem that you have that a test needs to stop, you can tell the students to go ahead and click the close button. Closing it will close down the test, but it'll save its state. Those tests can be reactivated through a test activation menu in WebXam so that the student could go back and complete it. We do recommend that we only support closing the tests like that and having students go back in cases of an emergency. It is not so that students can see the test and go back and test again later. The only time we want you to use this is if there is a real reason why the students need to immediately go. So if there is an emergency, don't have them submit the test. They will be graded on whatever test items they've answered, but they will not. They will score a 0 for anything that they haven't answered. So what's new in WebXam? We have changes to the text-to-speech support. So last year we rolled out text-to-speech. We had a lot of requests for from school districts asking if there was some way that we could have that we wouldn't require proctors to read the tests to the students. We were able to roll out a beta in the spring of 2015, and then it was rolled out more widely in the fall of last year. The big thing with text-to-speech is it requires a modern browser, and the feature set that we use to allow the test questions to be read to the students is still pretty new inside of browsers. When we first rolled it out, Safari on OS X and Chrome, which is available on all operating systems, well, Windows and the Mac, were the only two browsers that supported it. This year, we've had early releases from Firefox as well as Edge, and Edge is the newest browser that's been released by Microsoft. It's only available on Windows 8 and above, but they are now supporting it too. So we've gone from only having two browsers to support. Now, an additional year later, we've got two more that have added support. We have found that the text-to-speech, as new browser releases happen, sometimes there have been some regressions in the code in the browser that makes it not function as well. We try and keep on top of this as much as we can. We have an informational page on the text-to-speech at the news site that goes over all the details that we recommend the proctor reading over before they even attempt to use the text-to-speech feature. If you want to use the text-to-speech feature, the student must have the accommodation set on their account. So a reader is required, is the minimum requirement for text-to-speech to be available to the student. So to do that, if you go to the student's account and you edit their information, there's a field that says accommodations. There is one setting for a reader is required, and there is another setting that is a reader is required, and Proctor marks the answers. Either of those will trigger the availability of text-to-speech, but only when you're in a supported browser. So I really recommend, before you try and test, using the document that's on the new site to review the steps, as well as using one of the demo or practice tests. If you have the time, sitting the student down and having him go through the demo test, which is available for activation. It's a 10-item test. You can use that as a way to test that the computer is working correctly, that you have the headphones working correctly, that audio is coming out, and that everything is functioning. If it doesn't work in the demo test, it's not going to work in the test that you're going to activate for them. So being prepared is important. We also recommend that a proctor be available if the text-to-speech has any issues while they're using it. A proctor should be able to step in and take over the responsibilities of reading the tests if there is an issue. So if a proctor becomes very comfortable with their lab setup and the browsers that they're using and they're not having any issues, they can feel more comfortable testing more students at once. But we really want you to be able to step in a case of a technical problem. The text-to-speech feature is just so new that we could have bugs as browsers update themselves. The outcome report is a brand new report this year. So it adds outcome-based reporting. So a lot of teachers have asked us, could they see details about how students performed on specific areas of the test? This test allows teachers to get a better idea and insight into which areas of the test the students aren't performing as well in. The report also includes statewide averages for each outcome in order to provide a benchmark. Historical data may be available depending on the course selected. This is a screenshot of what it looks like. This is more information about the SSID transition. Most of this was covered earlier. How to add a test. This is a brand new page that was added this year. We've had requests for the ability to batch add tests to more than one student at a time. A lot of the tests are taken care of adding to students' accounts if you use the upload tool. When you use the upload tool, you can specify the reported pathway for the student, and if you add the reported pathway in the upload file, when we create the student account, we will add all the tests in that pathway to the student when they get imported, saving a lot of people time actually going in and specifying which tests to be added. Question?
Could you go back to that outcome report screen, please? Are the outcome codes on the side, are those aligned to the standards?
The question is the outcome codes aligned to the standards? Yes.
How deep?
They are not as deep. They're not as deep as probably people would like. Because of the limited number of items that we have, you're not going to get super precise insight into which area, because we only have a couple of questions that generally will be written to an outcome level.
And these are available at the end of this year, but can we see these screenshots now?
Yes.
Okay.
This is out now. So
All tests?
is it?
Yes,
All-
they should be
yes,
available
all
for
tests.
Like Brock mentioned, some of the historical data may be available depending on what course it was, so you may be able to run and see how your students performed last school year. But again, that's dependent on what the course was. Just some of the information we didn't have for some of the older courses that were replaced this school year.
but to pull this screen to show teachers this is the level of reporting we'll have with this year's data, we would be able to do that.
Yeah, it is. So if you log into WebXam, in the menu there is score reports. It's, I believe, the very last menu item on the left-hand side. If you click on that, there is a number of different reports that are available. We covered some of them earlier: the individual, the aggregate, and this is just another test or report that's been made available.
Sorry, going back. One thing that the only ones that this is not available are for the old modular test. Anything that's end of course should have this available.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of requests for more detailed reporting down into exactly what parts of the test. So this is trying to accommodate that request, but with the limited nature of the number of items that we have, it's difficult to give super accurate data when you only have a couple of questions, because if students don't do well in one area, you could show that, that they got 0 of them right. And it might only be a small section. So it's a good overview, and there's information on that page that goes into a little bit more detail to describe how we want people to interpret those reports because of the lack of precision that we have. But this is something that people have been very interested in, and hopefully over time we'll be able to improve it to give the most information as we can that we think is statistically accurate. Okay, so going back to the add a test, we've had, I talked about being able to set the reported pathway for a student. So in the upload files, if you add the reported pathway, we will add all of those tests when we take the upload file. You can also go in and change that manually on a student account to change their reported pathway or add individual tests. Some school districts may be only testing small groups of people and prefer to manually enter in their students. At that point, they can go in and add the tests one by one. For large school districts that have a lot of students that they want to deal with, sometimes they might want to go in and add a single test to, could be hundreds of students at a time. So we have an additional menu underneath secondary students now where you can get a list of all your students that are underneath your account, and you can set a test on batches of them at a time. So it was a request that was asked, and we felt like it would be a good addition to the feature set. This is an example of the UI. So you would select the teacher, and then the test that you want to add, and then down below is a list of the students that are available to be seen from that teacher, and you would just check mark any student that you wanted to have that test added to. And this is at the end if you wanted to fill out a survey. We'll be putting this back up at the end. I think we're actually going to go in. I'm going to pull up some of the UI for WebXam, and we'll review some of that. Are there any overall questions that people have? I'm not sure I completely understand what you're asking. You want to?
We're a career technical district in a CPT. We do web exams for our associate schools. We help facilitate with them. We have found some of our tests are tied to our building, IRN, some to their IRN. My assumption is when you're going with the SSID, that will change a little bit, but there are programs we own at other high schools and programs that high school owns that we don't know, but we help them with their web exam. So how do we ensure that their data is not attached like it's on a program that we own?
Like if I'm loading it under and I'm logged in as the administrator.
In the upload file for the students, you can define the IRN for where the student sits, and then it would be reported based off of where the student is at.
Just make, and that's where you want to make sure it's on the students,
Yeah,
their IRN number.
yeah, the student IRN number, and Michael can probably speak to this in detail. You might want to repeat that question so that the
Yeah, sorry. The microphone can't quite turn all the way, so I feel like I'm not facing you when I talk. So the question was, it sounds like, so you have a homeschool, and then they have their own program that's independent of you, right? Is that ultimately the question? Yeah, so that's something that we've had come up, I think, once this year, but really I haven't seen the question before. So it's sort of funny that it's now something that's showing up. Right now with our contract with ODE is we only report on the local district level is how our files are made available. So we asked for one DTC per the Career Tech Planning District, and then we asked you to then put everybody else under them. Right now it's not something that we have set up with ODE. We only report one download file, and that's something that would then go off to the ITCs as shown earlier. Once it goes off to the ITCs, I don't know how the data is used. So I don't know if there's a way for the ITCs to designate or you know, the school district could designate where this reporting goes. I don't know. This would, yeah, ultimately.
ITCs.
Yeah.
Like CTPD has 2.
Yeah. It's something that I guess we need to talk with ODE about because it's not something that we have the ability to do now. And it's something that we need to see if we need to work towards with them. So that's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't really have an answer.
So I have some screenshots of the WebExam interface, and we could, if people are interested, we could go through and look at that and go over any questions that people have, or if people are just interested in having some of their questions answered on their particulars, we could go over that. It just depends on, I'm not sure our audience, if we have more administrators who just have specific questions they would prefer, or if people want to see more of the UI of WebExam. So I guess I'm asking, does anyone have any preference on what we do? No, they don't.
We do have one question from online if you want to answer that real quick.
Sure.
So they have around 90 students that are taking a field test for this school year. Could they manually enter them by hand?
They're taking a what test?
A field test.
Field test? You always have the option of entering in by hand. I usually try and recommend people to at least investigate the upload file. The advantage of the upload file is it's just an Excel file, and you could enter everybody in, and you can use, if you're an advanced user of Excel, you can use all the tools of Excel to get your data in there. And the reason that I like the Excel file is it gives people the ability to go back and review their data and make sure that everything is correct, and it keeps it in a consistent format. And then when we run the upload file, we tend to find any errors that happens. Some of our scripts that process the upload file will look for common errors, and we can go back and tell you about it. If you're manually entering, you can certainly do that, but you're going to be entering in a lot of data, and you want to make sure that it's accurate. So if you're manually entering in SSIDs and you screw up a number, that account's going to have a problem with it. It's going to have an incorrect number. So it's completely possible depending on your needs, and you have the ability to do that. But I would at least investigate looking at the upload file. For larger school districts that have access to a student information system, Dazzle is one that we often get referenced, a lot of schools using. There is an export to WebExam feature that will help automate a lot of the process of exporting your student files. And we'll take those files directly out of Dazzle, and we can import those directly to our system. We worked with them over the summer. Very late in the summer, we got word that we were going to be able to have SSIDs, and we worked with them to try and match their export format to exactly what we wanted. And then the Excel file is where people want to pull the data from other sources and manipulate it before they send it in. So I'm always going to encourage that you try and do it in one file so you can double check your work before you send it in versus going in manually one by one. But you always have that option. Okay. Well, I can run through the. I'm just going to pull up some screenshots of WebExam just to go over it quickly. So, webexam.org. It's where you log in. If you ever forget your password or can't get in, we have a forget password option that is clickable there. Our password option, though, will require 2 pieces of data. It will require your username, which oftentimes people don't know. So that might be the first barrier. If you've forgotten your password, you've probably also forgotten your username. And it will require the email address that you have on file with us. If you know both of those, we will send you a password reset email for you to get in. If you don't know your username or your password, you're going to need to send an email to WebExam, and we will trigger that password reset option for you manually, and then you'll get the email. So if you can, always remember your username and password. When you first log into WebExam, you'll get a view like this. We call it the Quick Start page. Menu on the left-hand side of all the different options, and we have some icons that go across there at the center that link to some important information. Just above that, we have a couple of lines that pull in from the news.webexam. Whenever we post a new news article there or a new newsletter goes out, any of the top 2 articles that are on that site will have a little snippet of text that gets placed at the top of WebExam, as well as a link off to that information. The icons that go across there, the first one is the user's guide. It's a pretty lengthy document. It has all the details if you want to go find out how something works. That's where you go to read up on it. The next link is the information resources. It's where we put a lot of links to materials that people should be interested in. It has links to the About the Assessment page, which is the page that I told you about earlier, that has the metadata about the tests. It's all the information that we have about the tests that we give in WebExam. Every test that we offer is listed. The cutoff scores, whether it has a pre-test, all that detail is there, as well as what students need to pass their pathway. The other important document that we talked about, which was the CTE assessment matrix, which is hosted on ODE site. That's the document that lets you know at what grade level should students take particular tests. That is also linked from the information resources page. Newsletter archive just links off to our news site because we've moved all of our information there. And you can sign up for the newsletter also. Down below that is just some helpful links for questions that we often have, just in case somebody has a problem, they can self-discover some of the answers to those problems. This page here it's a tab. So the menu on the left-hand side changed, and if you notice, we're on the right-hand tab. This is where you'd order tests. So if you are pre-testing, there is a fee for that. And in order to get the tests, you need to submit information. We recommend that a school district, whoever their top-level administrator is, generally order these tests. It will, once they order the test, we will send out a PO to the school district for payment. Everyone in the school district will have access to activate pre-tests then. So once you've ordered these tests, they will be used by other people in your school district. A very important menu here, and I use it constantly, is the user search. If you're looking for information about a particular student, the user search, first name, last name, username, either one of those fields, you can partially fill it out. It will then basically do a wildcard search on it. So if you type in half the name, it will try and return all the results that match even that sub portion of the name. It's very handy. You can limit also down if you have a bunch of different accounts underneath you. You can only return the administrators, teachers, adult students if you have them, assessors, or secondary students. So if you're returning so many users that it's unwieldy, you can go ahead and limit it down to just the user types that you want. Down across the bottom, there aren't any students populated because we don't want to expose any sensitive information, but there's a table. There's a gray bar at the bottom. That is a table that would populate with the information for all the accounts that have been returned. If you need to distribute the passwords, you can activate showing the passwords for the students so that you can distribute those codes to log into the system. You can change the amount of results per page that you have. And the very first column there is marked SEL. That's for select. You can then hit the button down at the bottom for disable and enable. That is to allow students to be able to log in or disallow them from logging in. So if you have a reason where you want to lock out all the students, you can mark them out. Students, when they're first created, are marked as disabled. So when an account is populated, they can't log in immediately. Somebody has to enable them before they can test. So if you ever have students log in and when they try and log in, they see your account is disabled, that is the setting that you need to change. For administrator accounts, they have the ability to go in and list the other administrators that are underneath them, as well as create new ones. Again, we would like to encourage people to try and minimize the number of administrators. You don't want to create a lot of administrators and then have confusion about who's actually managing all your student accounts. I recommend that school districts try and coordinate to have one designated person that is going to have more control and try and really understand how WebXam works and spend the time to manage their students well. Most other accounts are just going to be teacher accounts, and you can have a lot of teacher accounts, but the administrator accounts have the ability to do a lot more things, and if possible, having one person in charge of that is probably the best option.
I have a question from online. Can you enable a whole group, or can it only be done individually?
Whenever you see an option that's able to be triggered with the select column, it's a checkbox. So you can go down the entire list of accounts and just check mark whoever you want to have the action done on. So in this case, you'd go down and you'd check mark next to each account that you'd want to have enabled or disabled, and then you'd click the button. The button is disabled, enabled, so it'll flip whatever the state of the current account is. On the far right-hand side, the status, underneath that, if we had students populated here, it would label whether or not the account was enabled or disabled. So yes, in this instance, it is something that you can batch do to a lot of people by using the checkbox. This is just a menu showing that you can create administrators. If you're an administrator, you can create other administrators. Again, try to refrain yourself if you can. Try and have one person in as much control as possible. Teachers, it works pretty much the same exact way, same exact functionality as the administrators for the creation. Same type of forms, specific just to the administrator. There is an assessor phase, but that's not used by a wide population of WebXam, so I'm going to skip over it. And adult students also, it's kind of a minimal set of our tests that are given, but they're very similar to the other menus that we're going through. Same functionality, they're just different account types. Secondary students is where the majority of our users spend their time managing their students. So first off, when you first go there, you're going to see list. If you're higher in the hierarchy and you have multiple different teachers or administrators below you, you can choose to filter down by the teacher that you're interested in to just see a list of the accounts that they have control over or manage. You can go in here. This is where you'd manually enter in a user account for the first time. So if that individual wanted to manually enter in their 90-some students, they could go here and enter in all of these fields. The really important one has asterisk there, the reported pathway test. We will only report your students if they have a reported pathway set. If you do not have that, your kids are never going to get reported. You need to have that field set. If they're a CTE concentrator, that's how we know what they're concentrating in. Reassign. So if you have you have a teacher that retired or moved, the reassign will allow you to select the current teacher that the students are underneath. So when you select the current teacher, it'll show you a list of all the kids that are underneath them. And then you can, in the drop down, you can select a new teacher. If you go ahead and hit go, then it'll transfer all the students that were underneath the first teacher over to the new teacher account. So it's a way of moving the teachers over. You can also use this menu, and there's directions there on how to unassign students from one particular teacher. This is the new addition for this year that was talked about earlier. This is where you can batch add a particular test to a lot of students. So if you haven't used the upload tool and automatically assign the pathway tests to the students, if you want to do it to a lot of students, you can go in here. You can choose the teacher to get the list of the students, then you can choose which test you'd like to add, and then you can go to that list, and using that SLE, again, the select column, you can check mark anybody that you want to have that action apply to, and then you can go ahead and hit add a test. It'll allow you to do multiple people at once. If you have so many people being returned that you want to see more at a time, you always have the option to change the results per page to a larger number. I think we can go up to 200 at a time, where you could really batch a lot of people at once to add that information on. Archive is a feature that's worth noting. It has caused some confusion before. My recommendation for archiving of students is never archive a student who may test again. So I only recommend archiving students who you know have left your facility, who are never going to test again. They have graduated and they have moved on. Some teachers have gone in and used the archive tool as a way of just hiding kids that they don't want to see. If you do that, you are hiding that kid from any other teacher who is also assigned to that student. They will not be able to see that kid, they will not be able to activate tests, and it becomes confusing. The archive feature is meant that if you are a teacher and you have 10 years of teaching, you're going to have a lot of kids that you've dealt with over the years. But you're only interested in the ones that are still currently at your school district. So you can go in and you can archive students who have left. But if you use it to just hide students from you, even though you know that they're still in the school, you could be causing trouble for other teachers who are also trying to test them. And it makes it difficult. You have to understand that once you archive, the students are going to disappear from all menus except for this archive page. You can recover an archive student. This is the only place where you'd be able to see your full list, and you could go back in and find the student that was missing, and you could unarchive them, and then they would appear in all the other different search menus and lists. Question?
You know what would be sweet on that archive menu? When you hit that button there, when we look at the list. Do you know what would be sweet to have on that archive menu? And you have it in other areas as well. When you look at a student's name, their year, freshman, junior, senior, if you use that particular feature. That way, like right now when I archive kids, I have to have a list in one window showing all the kids who are seniors who graduated who I know aren't coming back. But the archive does not give me that feature, so I have to kind of find the kids manually. Follow my logic on that one?
So
I could go faster if I knew what grade they were in, and I could unload them in August and it'd clean it up. Just a convenience issue.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion.
Because I make mistakes.
Yeah, that's definitely worth thinking about. It depends on the school districts actively using the feature of marking the kids in the system. So it's a manual process to have that set, but it would be an option to be added. What we generally do with feature requests like this, and if anybody out in the field has feature requests, if you send in a ticket, detail what you're asking for with as great a detail as you can. And we may not be able to get to it depending on what we have going on, but we do mark every one of those requests as a feature request. So when we reevaluate changes that we're making, we do keep that as a running list of things that could be improved. And as we work to rewrite sections of WebXam, we will be reviewing that list to try and tackle as many things as we can. So thank you. So we're on the upload menu. This is what I've mentioned a number of times. So there is the little Excel icon there. You can download that every year, I do recommend at the beginning of the year when you start uploading students to go fetch the newest version of the file. We have made changes to the file. Specifically this year, we added a number of new columns and a number of new features to that file. If you load that Excel file in Microsoft Excel, we try and have helpful hints. When you hover over a column, it'll tell you exactly what the available data that you can enter into that field is. We try and give you hints on what it means. We have, like I said earlier, we have the EMIS column now and the SSID column that will help you convert automatically during the upload students that have EMIS IDs over to the SSID. We have now this year added a new accommodation field. Previously, when people would upload their student data, we were never able to set the accommodation. This year, you can use one of the predefined letter codes to enter into that column for a particular student, and we will set that accommodation during the upload, which should save a lot of time. You are also able to, what else is there, Michael? We have more than...
I'm not sure anything else has changed for this year.
Okay. Those are the highlights. So those are the ones that I think people are going to get the most benefit from. The EMIS SSID is our main focus for this year. The accommodations is a good time saver. So now we're in the My Account menu. Often it's not needed very much for people in their day-to-day work, but it is available. It shows the account information for the account that you're in. I do want to stress that you should never be using somebody else's account. If somebody retired, if somebody left, and they just said, oh, here's my stuff, go do it. The first thing that we want you to do is contact us. You just need to get your own account. We will create your account. It's a process that we'll go through, we can help you with, but we have... Using somebody else's account is going to be causing problems. If you're using somebody else's teacher account, every test that you activate is going in their name, which could be problematic. If you're an administrator, we have lost track of who we're supposed to contact, especially if you're an administrator that's high enough up. We send special emails to certain individuals, and if that person left, and if they're high enough up, your school district is not being notified about critical information. So if you are currently using somebody else's account, please let us know. We will figure out what you need, and we will transition the responsibility of the account that you're using over to you. So, you are able to edit your own personal information here. What we do recommend, again, this says EMIS ID. That in this instance, it's a little bit different. If you're a teacher, what we use for the identifier is we recommend that you use your teaching certificate ID. If you are just a staff member at the organization, you don't, and you're not a student, you don't have an SSID, that ID can be anything. But if you're a teacher, we do recommend that you use your state teaching ID. We try and keep the phone number up to date. If you put in a ticket, if we can look you up, we can contact you, we can communicate with you. Phone numbers are only pretty much exclusively used to help contact you to solve a problem that you've notified us about. So we don't use the phone number for anything else beyond that. Having your email address accurate is also very important. The email address is what we use to send out communications for the newsletter. We try and announce important deadlines that are coming up. If you are not getting the WebXam newsletter, I would recommend logging into your account and making sure that your email address is correct. Because we try and publish upcoming deadlines so much, and we also have on the news site, we publish a calendar of all of our important deadlines. We can't really go back once a deadline's passed and open something up for people if they've missed the deadline. So having the newsletters and using the news website to pay attention to upcoming dates. There are deadlines of testing that once they hit, your students will not be able to take those tests. So I really do encourage making sure that you have the right email address. If your school district has maybe changed from, a lot of schools have changed to using Google education accounts, and they've changed their email addresses, that might mean that your email address is not the most accurate one. please go ahead and check that out. You're able to change your password. Please keep your password decently secure. We want to make sure that no one else is able to get into your account. And this is the user hierarchy. This is a feature we don't usually encourage people to use it on their own unless they've had some training. We've discussed previously that your account is most likely in a hierarchy where there are people maybe above and below you. You can only see and manage people that are below you. The hierarchy tool lets you explore that hierarchy, and as well as you can change certain relationships to the people below you. When we use this, I usually use this as a support tool when somebody has an issue and they can't see something. I will call them, talk to them on the phone, and walk them through the process. It is available, but I normally would recommend that if you have a big enough issue with not seeing people and new accounts not having access like they should, that you talk to us and we will help you rearrange the system to what it needs to be. This is the test activation area. So the very first option is the schedule student tests. If students have the appropriate tests assigned to their account and if they're eligible to test, this is where you would go in and select the test. The teacher that gets assigned of who's activating the test will get recorded with the test for use in pre- and post-test reporting. So if we're marking student gain, the teacher that's assigned as the teacher for the pre-test is who is going to get reported on how the students performed. We will only show students, once you've selected what you want to do, we will only show students for that are eligible. There is also, it's not shown here, but when you pull up the list of students, there is an icon next to the students. If they have an accommodation, there's a little accommodation flag, and there's a legend underneath the table that shows what accommodation they have. You cannot set an accommodation after a test has been activated. The accommodation must be set on a student's account before the test gets activated. When the test activates, we pull together some information about the student, including what kind of view they should get. So if you're going to do text-to-speech or unlimited time or any feature like that, it will not work if you don't have that on their account beforehand. So we've added in visual icons to tell you what the accommodation the student is before you even turn it on. Scheduled save tests. This is kind of the recovery mode for when students had an emergency and they had to close out of the test. Earlier when I showed the image in the top right hand corner, there's a close option. If there was an emergency and the test was closed and not submitted will actually calculate a score. Close will just close out of the test. The test will then show up in this menu here. You can select which test you are giving, and the students that have unsubmitted tests will show up in that list there. You can then activate those tests again and have the student go in and finish the rest of it. This is the testing summary page. We went over some of the reports previously. This is just some of the filters that you can get. The grade level drop-down, again, only works if your school district is properly tracking and setting the students' grade level every year. And you can do reports by year. The outcome summary, this is what triggers the new report this year that will let you find out how your students did on a particular section of the test.
We had a question from online about just a couple pages ago. How far in advance can they activate a test for a student?
It's a 1 hour activation window. So when you activate a test, a timer starts. The point of that is that we want to make sure that students are in the proper location when they take a test. Students need to be in a proctored environment. They cannot be tested from home. They cannot be tested on a mobile device. It should be tested on a device that the district owns and in district property and with a proctor that is approved. So we heard of an instance of a student being told they could test from home. That is not allowed. You need to have your students in the right environment to give this test. So with the 1 hour window, when it activates, the students have 1 hour to log in and start their test. If they don't log in and start their test, that window of login just stops. It can be reassigned, and they'll get another 1 hour window. But we want to make sure that the test is being activated during the school day, and they've gone in and started it during the school day, and they're not able to go home and log in from home and complete a test. The individual reports, we went over this. This was this is where you could see just how the student did on the overall pathway. And then there is the check mark at the very bottom that says show expanded results. That's where you could see the information on how the student did on the overall pathway as well as the individual tests. And the aggregate results will let you get reports on the students as a group. So how multiple students did in relationship to as a composite. And I think that was my last screenshot. Are there any questions?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, so we have one from online. If a student already has an account and we upload that student again, will it create a second account for the student or just update the information for the existing account?
This goes back to my kind of recommending that you try and have one person that's more in charge of managing your student uploads. The way that you would get duplicate accounts during an upload is if your EMIS ID or if your SSID has never been seen before. So our upload script will go in, it'll first try and look at the EMIS ID or SSID because it is the most unique identifier in the upload file that we would have. We'll see if a student matches. And if a student matches, we will take the data that you've sent in and we will override whatever they currently have on their account with the new information. The script will also try and look at first name and last name and some other data that we can kind of get a more of a fuzzier match on a student. But we really want the EMIS ID and the SSID to be the precise matchup of how you identify what student's in the system. If a student doesn't match, we'll create a new account. And that new account may be a duplicate. And what that's going to mean is that somewhere your student data is not accurate. So if you do discover that you have two student accounts, let us know. We can look into it and we can resolve the issue. But it's most likely because you're somewhere along the line you are not having the proper data submitted to WebXam. Is there any other questions? All right, well, to wrap things up, I will try and get that survey page back up. This survey, if you would like to go and fill it out, would be helpful for us. If you have any questions, again, email is our preferred method of answering your questions. We'll get back to you as quick as we can. If you have a time-sensitive issue, you can always call us. And that wraps it up for me.